Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. Now I'm going to hand over to Abdullah from the Abidjan Convention, who will be giving us a brief recap over the last few sessions.
Merci Tara, thank you Tara. Good morning, good afternoon. Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à cette nouvelle session de la série des webinaires de la Convention d'Abidjan sur la pollution plastique sur toute la région de la Convention d'Abidjan que nous conduisons avec l'African Marine Waste Network, qui est un projet de Sustainable Seas Trust, et dans le cadre d'un programme ACP MEAs financé par l'Union européenne et le programme des Nations Unies pour l'environnement. Je rappelle que l'objectif de ces webinaires est de doter la région de la Convention d'Abidjan d'un cadre légal de lutte contre la pollution plastique et plus tard aider les pays membres de la Convention d'Abidjan, à savoir donc les 22 pays depuis la Mauritanie jusqu'à l'Afrique du Sud, donc à les aider à élaborer leur plan d'action au niveau national pour lutter contre la pollution plastique. Il y a pas mal de choses qui ont été décrites ici, pas mal de choses qui ont été présentées, aussi bien avec le secteur privé, les pratiques qui ont cours aujourd'hui et qui essaient de faire en sorte que les déchets plastiques n'arrivent pas dans nos océans. Dieu merci, avec tout ce qui a été présenté, il y a aussi des connexions qui sont en train d'être développées, y compris ce matin, j'avais encore 2 réunions avec des partenaires qui ont découvert tout ce que nous faisons à travers ces webinaires-là. Donc, c'est dire qu'il est toujours utile de partager les expériences. Naturellement, il y a des gaps, je ne sais plus comment dire ça en français, mais des trous, des fossés qui restent encore à combler. Notamment pour tout ce qui est filet de pêche, fantôme. Nous avons eu une présentation là-dessus il y a la semaine dernière, ou encore la façon dont la gestion des déchets plastiques pourrait être conçue dans le cadre de l'économie circulaire, afin que ces déchets-là ne soient pas perçus comme des déchets, mais plutôt comme la matière première d'autre chose, d'une autre industrie. Donc, tout cela suppose la mobilisation, et c'est ce qui est ressorti des séminaires, des webinaires que nous avons eu à suivre jusqu'ici. Tout cela suppose donc qu'il y ait une mise en commun des efforts du secteur privé, des structures non gouvernementales, du secteur public bien sûr, et d'autres structures qui sont transnationales comme les nôtres, comme la Convention d'Abidjan, comme African Marine Waste Network. Donc, nous avons bon espoir que tout cela va aboutir à l'édition d'un document très riche qui va donc capitaliser toutes les bonnes pratiques qui ont été partagées ici. Je ne veux pas être plus long. Je vous invite encore, et j'insiste comme je l'ai fait la semaine dernière, si vous connaissez des experts ou des praticiens qui sont soit dans les communes, soit dans les institutions gouvernementales ou dans des structures non gouvernementales qui travaillent sur ces questions de lutte contre la pollution plastique dans la région de la Convention d'Abidjan, à savoir toute la façade atlantique du continent africain, surtout les pays de l'Afrique occidentale et les pays de l'Afrique centrale. N'hésitez pas à les mettre en contact avec nous afin que nous puissions leur aménager un espace pour les quelques séminaires qui nous restent maintenant. Merci, Tara. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. We're going to hand over now to Tony Rubink, our CEO, to introduce Telly, who's our speaker today from the South African Local Government Association. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, firstly to Abdullah for once again a lovely introduction to the day. Telly, it's a real pleasure for me to introduce you. Like Abdullah, you are on the advisory panel for the African Marine Waste Network and guiding us on the way into the future. And we're hoping that today you're going to do so, talking about something in which you are deeply involved, and that is the role of towns and cities, which inevitably play an enormously important role Because if we get waste management correct in towns and cities, then the nation will follow suit. And yet it's the towns and cities that the municipalities are struggling with the greatest, because that's where the greatest amount of waste is, which is where the greatest number of people happen to be, and where the greatest developments are. So you in your position, having to coordinate through the South African Local Government Association, have a real massive task. So I think you're well placed to talk to us today about the key role of towns, cities, and municipalities. Your background, we see, is not just in waste, but also climate change and sustainability. And your focus, of course, is South Africa, because you're in the South African Local Government Association. And you also have a background, we see, in finance. And we know from previous experience that you are a tremendously good speaker. So we're looking forward to hearing everything that you have to say, and wishing you also the best of luck in taking municipalities of Africa to where they should be in terms of managing waste. So Telly, thank you very much indeed, and over to you.
My name is Telly. I'm from the South African Local Government Association. And the South African Local Government Association is a body that is established in terms of the South African Constitution, as well as an act of parliament called the Organized Local Government Act. We are established as a membership institution, and we represent the interests of all of South Africa's municipalities, across the different range and sizes of municipalities. So your large metropolitan areas, your district municipalities, which are a regional kind of approach to local governance, as well as your local municipalities, which include small towns and a few differentiated categories of municipalities. So our role, whilst it is to represent local governments in policy-making platforms nationally, and interceding between municipalities and national government, we also then play the connector role of connecting municipalities to opportunities of learning and exchange. So being part of this platform is certainly one of our mandates, to find those key lessons that can be adopted, whether it's in the region or on the globe, and then find means and ways of transporting those lessons, and facilitating South-South cooperation, as well as cooperation between our member municipalities on the region, on the continent, and in the globe at large. So if we look at the ecosystem, which is a municipality, and we look specifically at the solid waste management services. So in South Africa, in terms of the National Environmental Management Waste Act, waste is treated as chemical waste, as well as waste that is treated from a solid waste management perspective. So the responsibility of municipalities is to deal with solid waste. So waste that would be emanating from households, industry, and from communities at large. Whereas dealing with chemical waste would then be a provincial and national mandate in terms of government. So the role of municipalities is to deal with general household waste and any other non-hazardous waste that would be coming out of industry and communities and facilities. So if you look at the local government ecosystem, you realize that there's a lot of interconnectedness and connectivity between these two mandates. One mandate that is played by local government, and one role that is played by national and provincial governments. And so it's always important to be mindful that sometimes there are difficulties in terms of where the line begins and where it ends between the three spheres of government and their then individual mandates and where they intersect. So this picture just depicts the complexity of the function within local government, in the sense that there's a responsibility for cleansing, for making sure that waste is collected and disposed of, and then for meeting other development agendas like low-cost waste management services, as well as creating opportunities for creating energy out of waste and so on. So the role of local governments is quite complex when it comes to dealing with solid waste management, and I'll unpack that shortly. So what I'll quickly speak to throughout this presentation, and it's described in the outline very briefly here, and I think I've already given you context and a background, is that I just wanted colleagues to put an emphasis on what South African governments are faced with, local governments are faced with presently. And I think the lessons would very much be similar, or the experiences would be similar, at least across the continent, and in very much so globally in other developing countries, in terms of us articulating what the problem statement is and what avenues there are for improving waste management, but also managing the impacts downstream, especially when you start considering issues of marine plastics pollution and various other forms of pollution that often are very intrinsically linked to the role that is either played well or poorly by local governments. And then I'll describe to you what the current status and the institutional and fiscal arrangements are in South Africa that enable municipalities to perform the service. And then I'll share with you some thoughts and insights around the technical and capacity challenges and opportunities and interventions in South Africa presently, as well as some of the finance and fiscal measures that are currently in place, and some of the work that we're doing in SALGA to start opening up the space and allowing for innovation and technology advancement in the waste management services that are being rendered by municipalities. And then I'll share some thoughts as well on infrastructure, and then some concluding remarks that will go with this presentation as well. Thank you, Tara. So just by way of expanding a little bit on background, as I mentioned already, is the role of local governments is not isolated from that role that is played by provincial government and national government. The mandate for solid waste management for government is outlined in the South African Constitution, specifically in Schedules 5, Part B thereof. And it isolates the role of municipalities, these are cities and towns, as refuse removal, refuse dumps, and solid waste disposal. So municipalities are responsible for the collection of waste from sources of waste, being households, being industries and factories and so on, and then the disposal of that waste at landfill sites. Municipalities are then also charged with the responsibility of cleansing. So this would relate to ensuring that public spaces and open spaces are cleansed. So litter is picked up and disposed of. What legislation has been silent on is the manner by which, beyond landfilling, the manner by which municipalities need to dispose of that solid waste. And we delve a little bit into that when we start talking about the infrastructure issues that are prevalent in the local government space. So in order for municipalities to perform these executive powers that are assigned through the Constitution and the Municipal Systems and Structures Acts, as well as through the National Environmental Management Waste Act, municipalities need to have appropriate infrastructure that would include landfill sites, material recovery facilities, and so on. Municipalities would also need to, in executing this function, comply with the relevant legislation and regulatory instruments at both a provincial and national level. And then municipalities are expected to then have the appropriate levels of capacity. This would relate to the human capital within the municipalities, the warm bodies that are skilled and appropriately designated to handle the waste management service, as well as municipalities must make sure that in their budgetary allocations, they've made appropriate provision for financial provision for dealing with solid waste management. So this essentially means that municipalities have to have the right staff complements and budgets to deal with the collection, transfer, and disposal of solid waste. And in so doing, municipalities are expected to fulfill this mandate by collaborating with other stakeholders. Now, we see in South African municipalities where these collaborations and partnerships often work very well because they're well structured. And in some cases where the service is failing, we also have picked up as SALGA that it tends to be as a result of weak institutional arrangements between different government agents, as well as weak institutional arrangements between municipalities, civil society, and other agents who are active in this space, including civil society or non-governmental organizations, as well as the organized private sector in terms of industry representative organizations. Thank you, Tara. So an important transition or movement that's happened in the waste management sector over the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years has been a shift away from the conventional manner within which solid waste management services were rendered. The traditional view of dealing with solid waste has been to collect and dispose at a landfill site. So more and more, as we start becoming sensitive to the global climate change discourse, the emissions reductions targets that we've certainly articulated in our own nationally determined contributions as part of our contribution to meeting the Paris Agreement national obligations, is that local governments need to start exploring alternative ways of dealing with waste. Not only to limit...
Tara, please ask the speaker to go a little bit slowly.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll slow down.
I don't want to miss important information. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So as I was saying, is that South Africa has started to move away from thinking about the disposal of waste purely from a landfilling perspective. And we have realized as a country, and certainly as local government, that the waste value chain has many opportunities between collection and disposal to start innovating and investing in alternative approaches for dealing with the huge waste problem that we have. And so more and more, and this is starting to be embedded even from a legislative perspective and in regulatory instruments, is to start emphasizing how we need to move away from disposal in landfill towards implementing the waste hierarchy. So the waste hierarchy is structured, if you look at the triangle on your left, is that there's a least preferred option and there's a most preferred option. So our municipalities are beginning, in fact, have recognized for a while now that disposal at landfill sites is the least efficient, least sustainable, and least environmentally just way of dealing with waste. And we are transitioning our municipalities to move to the most preferred means, which would incorporate treating waste, recovering waste, recycling, reusing that those parts of the waste that's generated for other purposes, reducing waste that is generated. And reducing waste that is generated starts speaking to the types of consumer choices that are made, especially around packaging and the types of products that would find themselves in the home or in the business or in a restaurant or in a company. The choices made around the way food and other consumables are packaged is starting to become a very important discussion in South Africa. And I think particularly this aspect connects intrinsically with the issue of marine plastics waste, is that a lot of waste that finds itself downstream from a municipal landfill site is often waste or products that we could have gone without, that are not absolutely essential to human livelihood and human existence. So we need to start emphasizing and putting a lot of energy towards education and community awareness around reuse and reducing waste, especially relating to plastics and bottle waste. And then obviously to avoid sending waste to landfill sites, that means we need to start exploring opportunities for waste to energy, where we're incinerating waste, as well as starting to avoid issues like food waste, which is a huge problem. A lot of food waste will end up in landfill sites when it should have been separated at source and being directed to composting sites and so on. So more and more our municipalities are starting to rally behind this call for dealing with waste in an alternative manner. Thank you, Tara. And I hope I'm slow enough now.
Oh, this is perfect. This is perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being mindful.
Thank you. So I've already, I guess, embellished a little bit on the problem statement, but I think there are some key points that as an institution that represents local governments, SALGA has the opportunity to dive into the problems of each and every municipality for two reasons. One is to establish what the collective problem in discharging a service is, and then two is to then try and work on collectively co-create solutions for specific problems for specific municipalities. So as we go around doing this work of investigating how municipalities are performing their services and executing their constitutional mandate, we've realized a couple of things. And first of all is to recognize that approximately 54 million tons of municipal waste is generated per annum. So 54 million tons of waste is generated from households, from industry, and various other own municipal operations as well. Unfortunately, 90% of this goes to municipal landfill sites. The challenge though, and this is because a huge portion of waste is going to landfill sites, is that our municipalities are rapidly running out of airspace in landfill sites. So this creates a challenge or a question for municipalities on whether to establish new landfill sites or to seek other alternative measures for dealing with that huge volume of waste that hasn't declined at pace, alongside some of the campaigns around reducing and avoiding waste. So the challenge is that in most cases, those municipalities that are operating landfill sites are often not meeting the legislated or the regulatory compliance norms and standards. So we've found that a large portion of our municipal landfill sites often do not meet regulatory norms and standards. So this has strengthened our argument for moving away from landfill sites, because we've realized that one, operating and establishing landfill sites is incredibly expensive for municipalities. So the bulk of budgets that go to waste management services get eaten up by operating landfill sites. And still, compliance matters will arise. Whereas we've realized that investing in alternative waste treatment opportunities will, in the long run, be cheaper for municipalities. So that's one of the things that we promote as a local government association. And in so doing, we have to foster and nurture partnerships for those other industry role players that can be off-takers of this 54 million tons of waste, removing it from the laps of municipalities so that alternatives can be brought in and new economic streams can be created. Only 64.7% of households have access to waste services, unfortunately, in South Africa. So this is just under 70% of South African communities that have access to basic waste collection services. And so the 54 million tons that is generated is effectively emanating from 70% of the households, under 70% of South African households, and from industry. There's a huge economic potential in the waste sector, which is currently not being tapped into, to the value of about 25 billion South African rands per annum. So if we could tap into this waste sector, we could augment our fiscus by 25 billion rands. And this could then be cross-invested into more sustainable waste management practices. The municipal solid waste sector is facing huge fiscal constraints right now, not only because of the huge fiscal contractions that we've seen relating to economic performance nationally in the domestic markets, but we are also seeing that there's been a year-on-year shrinkage of allocations to municipalities from the national fiscus. And this presents a challenge, especially for operation and maintenance at a municipal scale. So municipalities may have landfill sites, they may still have airspace available in those landfill sites, but those landfill sites are being poorly managed because of the limited resources for operations and maintenance. That again further enunciates or strengthens our argument to move away from landfill and to start making these investments in alternative waste treatment options. And obviously it goes without saying that COVID-19 has placed into very stark relief, really emphasized the challenges that exist in local government, especially when it has shown to us that a lot of our rural areas remain unserviced, and therefore they have devised their own ways of dealing with their solid waste. They incinerate it in their backyards, further contributing to emissions and the degradation of natural landscapes, because this may result in veld fires and various other pollutants ending up in the environment, unfortunately. Then there are a number of other technical challenges that are linked to failures in the delivery of the waste management service that would relate to lack of access roads in rural areas, therefore municipal waste collection trucks being unable to enter those communities, and a number of other infrastructure failures that also exist within the municipal space. Thank you. So it seems that half of my allotted time has been about, I guess, lamenting to some extent some of the service failures that we're seeing in our own municipalities. But I think that becomes important in the sense that South African municipalities are not the way they are in isolation of any other municipality. The developing world is characterized by service failures. Some of it is related to governance failures. Some of those failures are related to the lack of appropriate skills and staff complements. And some of those failures relate to the different role players within the waste service fraternity not playing nicely together. And of course, then we've also got issues relating to finance, funding constraints, and the overburdening of municipalities through the regulatory regime, which can sometimes become disenfranchising to some of our municipalities. So in terms of provision of the waste service itself by our municipalities, our different municipalities have adopted different and sometimes quite innovative institutional designs or models to deliver this service. So we are seeing more of our municipalities starting to regionalize the waste delivery service or the waste management service, where they have banded together to try and realize economies of scale through regional landfilling, and sometimes even through regionalizing procurement processes so they can take advantage of cheaper offers or discounts for equipment, such as compacting vehicles and waste collection vehicles and different types of technologies for dealing with waste. This is primarily done to, one, either outsource the function to private contractors or to augment the capacity internally within municipalities to perform the function. Some of our municipalities deliver the function themselves, whilst others have created entities. For example, Johannesburg would have an entity that is dedicated to collecting waste, and other municipalities may have established entities that operate as an implementing arm of the municipality, but are removed from some of the governance and political challenges that would exist within the municipal structure itself. And this certainly starts addressing issues around internal capacity constraints. In the more rural of our municipality, the waste management function is often shared with other functions. So you will find in a larger city like your city of Johannesburg or city of Tshwane or city of Cape Town, where there's a dedicated waste management department with many officials numbering in the hundreds who are dealing with the waste management service. And therefore, in those cities, the service and how it's executed is a lot more mature and is quite well run. Our smaller municipalities, though, often struggle with the institutional dynamic purely from an affordability perspective, because funding allocations from the national fiscus are channeled to different municipalities, depending on their size, the number of inhabitants in that municipality, and the different types of revenue generating instruments that municipalities would have. So the smaller municipalities with smaller budgets often have the service that is clubbed together or joined together, conjoined to other functions like parks and recreation or community services. For me, this doesn't come across as a negative thing or a bad situation to be in, because when a municipality is rendering the waste service together with parks and recreation, it allows for duality, for waste management to also be considered from a cleansing perspective, aesthetic value, environmental protection kind of perspective. So these are the kinds of lessons we're starting to see in our municipalities. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Okay, so what we've realized is, by virtue of the way that our municipalities are structured and the great deal of differentiation between the three categories of municipalities that we have. As I mentioned in the beginning, we've got our metropolitan municipalities. These are our large metropolitan areas that have big budgets and have a lot of technical capacity already within their institutional design. So they often don't require technical or capacity building or technical support from SALGA and its partners, but would more rather enjoy opportunities for networking and collaborating with global partners on alternative solutions and learning engagements and so on. Our smaller municipalities who have smaller staff complements and smaller budgets are often those who are in much greater need of interventions for technical support, as well as for funding support, matchmaking with other institutions that could help them solve their problems. And we find that most of our smaller and rural municipalities are invariably those ones where we have a lot of negative downstream impacts, where we see a lot of pollution in water courses, where we see a lot of pollution in public and open spaces, and where we find that there are a lot of service delivery challenges in those municipalities. So we, in our connector role at SALGA, we try and connect those municipalities specifically to opportunities of learning and exchange and of finding alternative and more affordable infrastructure, or making more affordable infrastructure choices by entering into collaboration with the private sector, with representatives of business like your different associations that manage or are connected to the waste value chain. And we then try and get dialogue happening between municipalities and private players so that we can start establishing public-private partnerships and finding alternative ways of financing municipal waste services, as well as building the technical capacity of our municipalities. So we've realized that the lack of knowledge and information, or the slow pace within which it circulates in our municipalities, often has a net result in slower changes, slower technological advances taking place in our municipalities. And so one of the roles that SALGA anticipates to play, especially in connection with partners like the Sustainable Seas Trust, is to expose our municipalities to these vital lessons that can emerge from the region and the globe at large. Thank you. So on financial matters, I've already spoken to the fiscal shrinkage, or the very immediate financing challenges that our municipalities have. And one thing that we've noticed is that there hasn't been a growth of national transfers to municipalities. Year on year, national transfers have been declining by over 8% to municipalities. And this happens in a scenario where, of the entire national budget, municipalities as a collective, so the whole of local government, only receives about 9% of the entire national fiscus. Meanwhile, municipalities are charged with performing about 34 functions, not just looking at waste, all the other functions, including roads, water, human settlements, etc., etc. So we have seen a huge, a consistent decline in national transfers to municipalities. And this then opens the gap for innovation. How do we find partnerships for municipalities for them to start leveraging on the small allocations that they do receive and start growing those in collaboration with private investors, as well as other actors in the space, including communities from a community cooperatives and civil society engagement perspective, so that we can augment what comes from the national fiscus. We've also seen that municipalities are struggling to collect from consumers in terms of the different services that municipalities render. So municipalities are struggling to collect for electricity usage. They're struggling to collect their revenue for waste services, as well as for water services. And also struggling, especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic having had such significant economic impacts, municipalities are even struggling to collect rates and taxes for property rates from properties that are owned privately. Municipalities are also struggling to collect money that is owed to them from government departments themselves in terms of water and energy services, including waste services. So we've seen a growth in consumer debt with 59% of our municipalities having levels that are of debtors that are higher than 30% in terms of own revenue. So 59% of our municipalities are only able to recover around 70% of what is owed to them. This makes operations and maintenance, as well as investing in alternative technologies, very, very difficult. Nearly a quarter of our municipalities are collecting less than 50% of revenue that's owed to them, and nearly half of our municipalities nationwide are in financial distress. There's an increasing number of municipalities that are persistently vulnerable to cash flow, negative or declining vulnerable cash flow positions. And so we are seeing this with every audit cycle that emerges, that the vulnerability of municipalities from a financing and fiscal perspective is becoming very, very worrisome. As a climate change practitioner and working in the waste management space, this again says to me that we need to invest in alternative ways of dealing with the challenges that we face, and that if municipalities at scale, so if more municipalities than the current 30% that is investing in renewable energy, so if we could reach critical mass of municipalities investing in waste to energy, investing in recycling and in reusing and diversion of waste from landfill sites, we would have a flatter cost or innovation cost or technology cost, and we would be able to start taking advantage of economies of scale for new technologies and for more appropriate ways of dealing with solid waste. Thank you. And I'm drawing to the end with some of the key recommendations that we have articulated as SALGA, and certainly this looks at some of the initiatives that we are already running as SALGA. We have a number of partnerships with some international sister organizations. So we've got a collaboration with Danish and Canadian associations of local government, as well as with a Belgian Association of Local Governments, to look at how we innovate around the delivery of waste services for municipalities, and to uncover that hidden value that is in the waste value chain. So we are taking advantage and trying to open our eyes, the eyes of our municipal membership, to facilitate establishment of buyback centers and material recovery facilities within our municipalities. And here we are wanting to reaffirm and strengthen the role of waste producers. So this is looking at the packaging industry at most, largely. So, and here we are looking at a policy framework for introducing extended producer responsibility, where municipal producers of waste, like your packaging sector, become responsible for the end life of packaging waste. So what happens to that packaging material needs to be the responsibility of the producer, so that we can unburden local authorities, municipalities, from having to deal with these problems that are often not of their own making. Here we promote partnership between municipalities, community-based organizations, and industry. And here we hope that our biggest footprint that we can have is in creating an environmentally active and engaged citizenry. We also, as SALGA, are working on projects that promote diverting waste streams from landfill sites, where we are supporting municipalities access funding for establishment of composting facilities, coupled with work that looks at how to reduce food waste in our communities, which is becoming an important aspect. And once we are able to reduce food waste, I think we will also be able to unlock that issue that relates to food packaging waste that would then decline by association. And we've also been working on initiatives that would help some of our municipalities to form regional facilities for waste to energy. And we already are working with the Gauteng City region, as well as some municipalities where we are already at a feasibility stage in the Eastern Cape and in the Northern Cape. Thank you, in the Western Cape, I mean to say. Thank you. So finally, at the finish line, and I'm hoping that this hasn't been too long, that people have kind of benched their comments and inputs. But just to, in conclusion, I'd really like to again emphasize that it's important that in as much as just under 70%, I think 64% of our households are receiving waste collection services. Year on year, there are improvements that are happening within this space. And while we appreciate that there are improvements in terms of waste services delivery, these improvements are quite nominal, they're quite small. A 5.8% per annum increase in extension of waste collection services will invariably mean that all the waste that is not collected is either being illegally dumped or is ending up in our open spaces, in our waterways, or is being incinerated in people's backyards, and even in facilities in terms of industry where they're incinerating their own waste to avoid the costs of disposal or landfilling or transfer to material recovery facilities. It's very important that we strengthen programs around changing people's mindsets and behaviors. I've already mentioned that, not only from an industry perspective in terms of improving or expanding producer responsibility, but also from a community, consumer, household level. We need to be able to change people's attitudes around how waste is dealt with and what constitutes waste. What is waste? What can be the alternatives for overpackaged products? For example, if you buy a SIM card for a cell phone and you need it couriered to your house, it'll come in a plastic film, it'll come in a box, in a paper sleeve. That paper sleeve will be inserted in a box, and that box will be film covered, and then it'll be all put into an envelope. So it's 5 forms of packaging for packaging a SIM card, which is almost 5 centimeters in length. And so overpackaging is a huge problem in South Africa presently. And we need to change mindsets and also change consumers' mindsets to demand different types of products. And we've seen this in the health market and health foods and so on. This requires, and again, emphasizing Abdullah's opening remark around partnership and engagement between stakeholders. We as SALGA, it is our firm belief that we need to ease the relationships between government and the private sector. Often the poor relationships between, or the lack of trust between government and the private sector often results in downstream challenges in the municipal landscape, as well as within communities. And the first point of, I don't want to say attack, but the first place where the results of failing relationships manifest is between municipalities and communities. When communities are protesting, it is not a national department that they go and break the windows of. They go and break the windows of a ward councillor's house or of the municipal community library, or they burn waste collection trucks when they're protesting that waste is not being collected. So we need to be able to start improving the relationships between communities, elected representatives, municipal administrations, and the other spheres of government. And then obviously we need to find better ways of unlocking capital investments, especially into alternative waste treatment solutions, flattening the costs of innovation and technology, and scaling up investments in circular, low to zero carbon initiatives in municipalities specifically. And I feel like this webinar and the series of discussions that have been happening under this umbrella certainly should look at how to co-create solutions for local governments to take part in and invest in. And so with that, really, I would like to say thank you. Thank you for your time and for listening, and for your patience with those teething little issues that we thought we dealt with in the pre-session. Thank you very much. Our contact details are on this last slide for both myself and my colleague, Mr. Nengobela, who deals with waste management, whilst I deal with environment, climate, and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Telly. That was wonderful to hear. If everyone can please send through any questions or comments you may have in the Q&A box, we'll address those. In the meantime, Telly, I was wondering if you can comment on, in your opinion, what should governments constructing action plans, what allowances should they make in order to equip municipalities to improve their waste management potential?
Otherwise, Tara, while waiting for Telly, I can maybe comment something but in French. Mesdames et messieurs, moi je suis particulièrement heureux de l'intervention que je viens d'entendre. Nous avions eu des discussions, c'est vrai que, comme je le dis souvent, la région de la Convention d'Abidjan, les pays membres n'ont pas les mêmes niveaux et même les infrastructures pour la gestion des déchets municipaux. J'avais quelques appréhensions, mais vraiment l'intervention de Telly aujourd'hui nous a transportés vraiment à travers l'Afrique du Sud. Et moi, personnellement, en tout cas, j'ai rarement, depuis que la série a commencé, j'ai rarement été captivé comme je l'ai été aujourd'hui.
I've never been captivated as I was today by this representation. I did see a lot of things that are very similar to what we are going through in South Africa. In a previous life, I did work on these issues of decentralization and the management of municipal services. So you may easily understand that the challenges that you raise, the issues in terms of funding or sponsoring the services and to the populations, to the communities, these are issues that are cutting across West Africa. We also have this challenge of leveraging the technical know-how and savoir-faire in terms of human capacities, in terms of infrastructure, and what have you to maximize or to optimally use the resources, the waste resources. And so I'm really delighted by the messaging from Telly. Another golden nugget is that we do have things that transpired on the legal front. In South Africa, we can see that the legislation is produced. People are trying to revamp and update the legislation and identify loopholes and see how they can fine-tune. I think as part of South-South cooperation, what Telly showed us today should serve as a stepping stone for what I would not say extrapolate or scale up. It is difficult to scale up from one country's experience and replicate hands-on in another country. But I think for what lies ahead of us, I do see more or less concretely I see Telly's outstanding presentation will come in as a golden nugget in our papers, and I can almost visualize the use that is going to be made of Telly's paper once we are able to bring together the stakeholders, the municipalities, the private sector, the NGOs, the public services. I can see the gaps that Telly's presentation will help to fill as we share from experiences. I wouldn't like to belabor this point. Just comment. Telly seemed not fully satisfied about her figure. 64.7% of households that had accesses to waste collection services from the municipal services. Telly, don't look at what is happening on the other in other countries of West Africa. 64 countries. I believe that I know many countries that will eye that, that would vouch for that. A big thank you, more grease to your elbows for such an outstanding and stellar presentation.
Thank you, Abdullah. It's great to hear your comments and your input. Telly, I see you've rejoined us. There have been some questions that have come through. There's one here in the Q&A box that says, is there a gate fee applicable in South Africa? And how do municipalities build landfills through this PPP? And if so, are they strong enough and do they have the capacity to lead PPP?
Thank you, Tara. And thanks for those questions. I think I also saw a question coming in through the chat box, which I missed, just missed. So hopefully it'll pop back up again. Yes, there is a gate fee at municipalities, and it would depend on the type of waste that is coming into for disposal. The size or quantity, rather, let me put it that way, the quantity. So a vehicle would go over a weighbridge, and then there would be a fee that is levied per ton. The fee structure is, of course, determined by government, national government, and advised to municipalities. And what we have found with these gate fee or these gate takings is that often the fee structure doesn't allow for cost recovery. So the way that fee is designed has often left cost recovery or a gap between what it costs to operate the landfill site and what municipalities, the revenue that municipalities are generating. Obviously, the gap is supposed to be filled by a surcharge in terms of what comes with your municipal bill, as well as then augmented by what would come from other municipal revenue sources. But it definitely always leaves a gap in terms of cost recovery for municipalities. As relating to the question around how do municipalities build landfill sites. So the initial arrangement for municipalities building landfill sites is that they need to be funded from the capital grant framework of the country. So municipalities receive for their employee costs and operating costs a disbursement that comes from the national revenue. And that is calculated in terms of what we call the equitable share formula. And then that would then cover the per capita costs of waste services in a municipality for the number of indigent households in that municipality. The capital grant or the capital costs are provided for under the capital grant framework. This would be the municipal infrastructure grant, the urban services development grant in urban metropolitan areas, and various other capital grants. The primary source is the municipal infrastructure grant for our smaller municipalities and our district municipality. The challenge with these capital grants is that they have a huge level of conditionality that is attached to them. And often we see that municipalities struggle to spend those capital grants because they struggle to meet some of those conditionalities that are attached to these grants. A lot of headway has been made in terms of improving municipal expenditure on those capital grants to ensure that they are investing in capital projects that meet the needs of communities. So that's how initially municipalities are building their existing infrastructure and ideally supposed to operate and maintain their infrastructure. In as much as we discourage the creation of new landfill sites, we also realize that there's an opportunity for various financing mechanisms, including pooled financing, the raising of revenue from bonds, as well as public-private partnerships. So the challenge about public-private partnerships is the confidence that private investors need to have in order to partner with municipalities and put their capital in a municipality. Obviously, this confidence can be affected detrimentally by the state of governance, by the political challenges that may exist in a specific municipality. So what we try to do in SALGA is to take a regional approach, to look at municipalities that singularly would struggle to attract investment because of their own balance sheets and say, how can we partner them with a partner that can help them leverage funding from the market and bear the risk? So often we would then look at how to augment or to have government through maybe a Development Bank of Southern Africa, through a concessional grant, or through a leveraging off of a bond instrument, have government take off some of that risk in a municipality, thereby opening opportunities for private partners to have a little bit more confidence. We have in SALGA a program that we call the Municipal Audit Support Program, because we realize that investment of any nature will never ever grow if municipalities cannot run clean business, if their audit outcomes are poor. And yes, the recent Auditor General report said close to 70% of our municipalities are struggling financially and are failing to meet clean financial governance requirements. And this has translated to how we are seeing very poor uptake of potential public-private investment. So one of the key projects that we're doing in SALGA is developing a pipeline of projects that we're wanting to feed to Infrastructure South Africa. That's the arm of government that's been newly established in the presidency, that is now looking at, that reports to the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Committee. And there we want to flatten the risk of investment by looking at pooled financing opportunities, by looking at other partners that can be brought in to act as guarantors against loans, and opening up the opportunities for municipalities by helping with project preparation and those kinds of initiatives, so that half of the work is done and municipalities have clean audits that we are helping them through the Municipal Audit Support Program. Because it's these systemic problems that are making municipalities unattractive for private investment. So there are a number of initiatives that SALGA coordinates to try and improve investor appetite and for PPPs to then become popular and to be used as a viable vehicle for financing infrastructure delivery. And this, of course, happens within the legislative and regulatory framework, which is presided over by the National Treasury. And so National Treasury would require that municipalities adhere to the principles of the Municipal Finance Management Act, which is sometimes restrictive in nature and sometimes has conditions that don't make it easy for municipalities to enter into PPPs or to even go into the borrowing market and to have loans, especially from a commercial loans perspective. And this is because municipalities have not been able to successfully decouple themselves from the credit rating of the country and their own poor credit histories and their own mismanagement in some instances. So we have a number of initiatives that look at each of those systemic issues around audit outcomes, financial governance, political interference, and sometimes political mismanagement, as well as the skills and business acumen of municipal officials and CFOs, and then project preparation. So we're also doing work around project preparation and creating pipelines where we know that there's a tested market for private-public partnerships. And so then creating the contractual environment that will enable that. Thank you. There was a last question that around the relationship with the informal sector. So the informal sector in South Africa is quite organized. There is an association or a representative body for waste pickers, and which is a membership-based organization. And so we see that waste pickers in the metropolitan areas are fairly well organized around this association. It's in the hinterland, in the rural areas, where there's a fairly low level of organization around waste pickers, because it ties in with the societal norms in rural areas where waste picking is not seen as a viable economic activity and so on. So we find that in the rural and smaller municipalities, there's a lesser degree of organization around for waste pickers and in the informal waste sector. A number of initiatives, especially with the COVID-19 relief packages, have been targeted to the second economy of the informal waste sector. One, offering relief, but also making sure that they're incorporated into the integrated waste management plans of municipalities, so that they can then become the transporters or the movers of waste, because they play a significant role in terms of material recovery, separation at source, and those kinds of initiatives. So we've got a growing collaboration between our cities and waste pickers. We're seeing those relationships playing out a lot better in the larger metropoles because there is an association that is active and with registered waste pickers, and not always, not in all cases. Remember, we also have a huge issue relating to undocumented citizens and so on. So those people who are working in the informal waste sector are sometimes not able to be registered with an association. However, the different cities have different social packages as well as different arrangements around forming cooperatives. We are actually implementing a pilot in the Western Cape around a buyback center and involving small recycling operators in running this buyback center and then offering a service to the municipality around recycling and material recovery. So there are relationships and there are some cases across the different municipalities of good practice. And unfortunately, there are also some cases where there's tension between municipalities and the informal waste sector. And a large part of the tension is driven sometimes by municipalities not completely fulfilling their obligations in terms of service delivery to the informal sector by way of making facilities and infrastructure available. And then sometimes it's waste pickers refusing to organize or abide by some of the bylaws of the municipality. So there are some, there's a lot of differentiation in the sector, but certainly there are relationships and good ones with the informal waste sector between our municipalities and themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Telly. There have been a few comments here that say, thank you, it was an excellent and insightful presentation. And then there's a question here that says, how do municipalities track their progress and plan for the future given the population growth in Africa?
Thank you for that question. So first and foremost, we have a national planning regime that is ordered or governed by the National Development Plan, which has a number of targets and commitments that are made by each sector department through a ministry. These are then supposed to cascade right down to the municipal level through what we call the Municipal Integrated Development Plan. We also then have the environment sector and what we call the medium-term strategic framework, which is a 5-year plan that is then also supposed to trickle down to the municipality in terms of targets. So these targets would include the number of households that have waste collected, the tonnage of waste that is disposed at landfill sites, the tonnage of waste that is diverted from landfill sites, the tonnage of greenhouse gases or fugitive gases that are being captured or incinerated from municipal landfill sites, etc. and ad nauseum. So there are a number of matrices that are then superimposed into municipal planning instruments. The primary municipal planning instrument is obviously the Integrated Development Plan, which is supported by what we call an Integrated Waste Management Plan, the IWMP. This then is an electronic planning portal that produces a plan, but also serves as the reporting window for municipalities to report on their activities relating to solid waste management. This then rolls up into a district report and then rolls up into a provincial report and then gets reflected on a national scale. There are then also other stock-taking initiatives, if you may, that are done through Statistics South Africa, which is a national entity that is charged with running country census and collecting data around service delivery and the number of households that are reached in terms of each of the service areas, water, electricity, waste collection, and so on. So there are a number of avenues. We also report through the United Cities and Local Governments platform. We also then report in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals at a country level in terms of the National Voluntary Report, as well as what we are now working towards, which would be a local voluntary report against the Sustainable Development Goals, which would then capture and consolidate each of those reports that are coming from municipal IWMP reports, so the integrated waste management reports. So there is quite a mature form of stock taking. The gaps or challenges happen in those municipalities that are very undercapacitated is that we often find provinces reporting on behalf of municipalities, and then there's a gap in terms of triangulating and validating that data. And then, of course, there's a problem where you find that municipalities, in some instances, are willfully not reporting. So there are different manifestations, but in South Africa, we've got quite a mature stock taking and reporting system that rolls up into reflecting against the medium-term strategic framework, which is a 5-year plan of government based on the electoral cycle, and then which rolls up as a report against the National Development Plan. A very mature system. However, any sort of data collection and reporting system is only as good as the data that is entered into it. And we obviously still have data quality challenges and sometimes data gaps as well in some municipalities, especially those municipalities who have arrangements or service level agreements where the role is being performed by a different entity on their behalf, either by province or a district municipality or even a private operator. And then you're finding that those municipalities may have data gaps because they don't have full control of that data. I hope I've answered the entirety of the question, but I suspect I may have missed the latter part of the question. Thanks, Tara.
Thanks, Telly. In your opinion, if a country was looking at developing action plans to manage waste and plastic waste, what considerations should be made to make sure that the municipalities are equipped to deal with waste and the growing levels of waste and plastic?
Okay, I think firstly, a off-the-cuff response would be to have a policy framework that is enabling for municipalities. And so South Africa already checks that box. But if we were anywhere else on the continent or in a developing country, anywhere else globally, I would say that the first point of departure is a cohesive policy framework. Oftentimes we find that policy frameworks that are developed in a top-down kind of manner, often dictating to local authorities what services they should render and how they should render services and how they should plan and budget for those. So if we can get a blend of both top-down policy making as well as bottom-up policy making, and this is where the role of a local government association becomes important. For example, in South Africa, we've got 257 municipalities. Not each and every one of those municipalities can be represented in a national intergovernmental forum, or in a planning forum, or in a policy-making forum at a national scale. So we as a local government association then act as the go-between between the collective of municipalities, and we make sure that planning that's happening from a policy perspective, as well as setting national targets, even if it comes to setting emissions reductions targets and those kinds of things, we have to make sure that each sector is provided for within that planning framework. And to do that, we need to touch the pulses in each of our municipalities. So cohesive policymaking, I would say, 1. 2 is a fiscal regime that allows for innovative, or the deployment of innovative financing tools. Our current policy environment from a fiscal regime perspective is quite restrictive. However, it's beginning to open up to say we need to scale up innovations and technology deployment for emissions reductions and resilience. So the MFMA is starting to say municipalities can actually use part of their funding to do pre-feasibility and feasibility assessments for certain technologies that historically wasn't permissible. So we're starting to negotiate the space, even around things like feed-in tariffs for in terms of independent power producers and so on. SALGA has been negotiating that space so that municipalities are able to then appropriately attach their resources and their budgets. That means that we need to create a governance space within municipalities that is open and is safe for investors. So thirdly, I would say is for a city, a municipality to self-correct when it comes to governance. And here we're talking about fiscal governance, we're talking about performance management, and we're also talking about how that municipality structures itself. So a municipality has to invest in the appropriate skills and staffing and capabilities internally. A municipality must have spent a lot of time thinking about how it's going to deliver its waste service in 10 years, in 20 years, and 15 years. It's becoming more and more futile to plan for 5 years because we are living in a changing climate, in a changing global economy, and definitely in changing domestic and local economies. So we promote that municipalities start having a broader horizon when it comes to planning for capital investments, as well as for their operational requirements and maintenance needs. Looking at also embedding science-based decision-making and policy-making, making sure that municipalities are doing climate risk and vulnerability assessments, as well as economic risk and vulnerability assessments, and being able to make projections 10 years, 15, 20, 50 years down the line, so that they're building capital investment frameworks that look at the kind of local economy that needs to be created, leveraging off of the municipal administration so that investors can bring industries for waste to energy technologies. So investors can bring in industries around diverting from landfill, ways of dealing with chemical waste and various other waste things. So we are saying that long-term planning and capital investment planning, instead of just planning for the present budget cycle, become more and more important for municipalities. I would say those are the key elements that deal with the systemic stuff. The more softer touch issues, I think, really are about not sharing knowledge, exposing municipalities to knowledge, municipalities internally being able to break the barriers between what is traditionally viewed as environmental departments, what is viewed as technical service departments, and community service departments, and start communicating awareness around waste and the damaging effects it has on the environment, climate, but also the damaging effects of not dealing with waste appropriately in terms of the local economy. And of course, the opportunities that reside within the waste value chain for enhancing local economic development and extending the waste value chain to start connecting with other sectors such as the energy market and other consumable markets and so on. So and how it connects then to water safety, water quality, and so on. So there are a number of things that I believe are important for a municipality to be able to realize good service delivery that has far lesser downstream impacts in terms of environmental impacts and socioeconomic impacts. But this has to happen within a cohesive macro planning framework and a fiscal regime that is enabling. And so agency and voice from a local government is very important. Oftentimes, municipalities, even here at home in South Africa, municipalities are always seen to be complaining about the lack of resources and capacity. And it's because of the way that message and the type of language that is used. And so when you have a connection to a local government association that is connected to civil society, that is connected to organized business, like in South Africa, the National Business Initiative, Business Unity South Africa, we have firm connections with those types of institutions because we feel it amplifies the voice of local government. When we negotiate for better allocations, when we negotiate for an easier policy environment without shirking our responsibilities in terms of fiscal governance and due diligence. So I sound like I'm marketing SALGA, but I think there are important roles that can be played by local government associations, as well as own agency within municipalities, cooperating and working with organized communities and organized business. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you so much, Telly. I don't see any other questions at this time, but it's really wonderful to hear your insight and your perspective, because obviously sort of governments and municipalities have a vital role to play in sort of the first line of removing the waste from residences and within a town and city. I think if anyone has any further questions, they can feel free to email either the webinars at sscafrica.org.za and we can put you in touch with Telly. Otherwise, Telly, you did have your email address up there if you're happy for people to contact you. Is that all right?
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Sarah.
Wonderful. In that case, thank you. I think we can close off here for today, but thank you so much, Telly. I think it was invaluable to get your insights into SALGA and the functioning of municipalities and how vital their role is. We will be having another session on Thursday this week with Pravat speaking from the WWF in South Africa. You should receive an email notification with details about that presentation, but you can follow the same link to join us again on Thursday. For now, to close off, thank you again so much, Telly, on behalf of SST and the Abidjan Convention. I suspect Tony, Abdullah, I'm not sure if you want to chime in as well, but we really value your expertise and your time this afternoon.
Merci Tara, merci encore.
Thank you, Tara. Kudos to Telly for such an outstanding expose. I am fully conquered by what I heard today. I'm fully conquered. This is a harbinger of something very positive for what is ahead of us. And I would like, for those that are here, that were here today, I would like to encourage you to get back online so that we can foster this network that has been on for some time and to which African West Network is really supporting. Thank you, everyone. As I said, from the onset, we have connections that are being made. Unfortunately, we could not connect Telly with other managers or leaders of municipal services, but I think we do have an address book with Côte d'Ivoire. We do have some connections with a few municipalities in Abidjan, the same for Mauritania. We are working hard to have someone from Nouakchott to come and share the experience in terms of waste management and other things. You know, that issue of the fight against plastic waste is an international challenge on which we are all coping with. And Telly said it in her presentation. We need to have a mental shift, a paradigm shift with regard to prejudice, and also a reposturing of those that are managing or rather producing. She provided an example of the SIM card that is wrapped in a plastic, and she also recalled that the relevance of reassigning the responsibility linked with managing the waste to the producers. These are questions that will warrant a deep dive in the days to come. Tara did provide a teaser for the next speaker. We have someone from WWF with whom we have very positive communication and on the international front. So please make sure you log on Thursday. On behalf of everyone, the EU, our partners in South Africa, and the UNEP and Abidjan Convention, a big thank you to each and everyone.
Thank you, Abdullah, and thank you to Telly. Telly, I'm very impressed. Your speciality and your portfolio is environment, climate, and sustainability. Doesn't mention much on waste. So thank you for stepping out of your comfort zone and talking to us so brilliantly on waste. I'd love to hear you talking about environment, climate, and sustainability, because when talking to us as you have, out of your field of expertise, it's going to be stupendous. In terms of Abdullah's request, let's not forget that in a year's time, the next African Marine Waste Network conference is going to be held, at which we hope that Telly and others from Salga will be present. And Abdullah, many of your managers would be more than welcome to attend that conference so we can have a special session on municipalities. But from us at African Marine Waste Network and Sustainable Seas Trust, Telly, thank you very much indeed. To everybody else and to the Abidjan Convention, thank you too for your attendance and participation.
Well, thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony and Abdullah, and again, thank you, Telly. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.